This container makes one of the simplest promises in the grocery store: zero sugar. 2 words, almost impossible to misunderstand. And on Chobani's own website, its zero sugar vanilla Greek yogurt is currently advertised with 0 grams of sugar, 60 calories, and 4 grams of allulose. So here is the question. If the product contains 4 grams of allulose, how can the front of the package still say 0 sugar? That question is now at the center of a federal lawsuit. Jason and Abigail Franco bought Chobani Zero Sugar yogurt and later sued the company, alleging that the label was deceptive because the yogurt contained allulose. And before we go any further, one point matters. This lawsuit has not decided that Chobani deceived consumers. There has been no final judgment finding Chobani liable. What happened in July of 2026 was different. A federal appeals court ruled that the consumers had presented a plausible claim and that their case could continue. That distinction is important. This is not a story about a company already being found guilty. It is a story about how one word on a food label can mean something very different depending on whether you are reading chemistry, federal regulations, or a nutrition panel. The case began in federal court in Illinois. Chobani asked the judge to dismiss it. The district court agreed and dismissed the consumer's claims, relying in part on Food and Drug Administration guidance about allulose. But the consumers appealed. On July 27, 2026, the United States Court of Appeals for the 7th Circuit reversed that dismissal. The appeals court focused on a surprisingly basic question. Is allulose a sugar under the federal regulation that defines total sugars? The answer mattered because federal rules say foods marketed as sugar-free, zero sugar, or with similar claims generally must contain less than half a gram of sugars per serving, as defined by the regulation. Chobani Zero Sugar contained 4 grams of allulose per serving, according to the court record. And the court concluded that allulose falls within the regulatory definition of sugar because allulose is a monosaccharide. But this is where the story becomes much more complicated, because the FDA also tells manufacturers that, for the Nutrition Facts Panel, the agency currently intends to allow allulose to be excluded from the numbers for total sugars and added sugars. So one package can lead you into a strange situation. The ingredient is chemically a monosaccharide. The federal regulation defining total sugars includes monosaccharides. Yet the FDA currently allows manufacturers, as a matter of enforcement policy, not to count allulose in the total sugars or added sugars line on the Nutrition Facts Panel. That is why this story cannot be reduced to a headline saying, Chobani says zero sugar but secretly contains sugar. The real story is more interesting. The nutrition label, the FDA's enforcement policy, and the federal regulation are interacting in a way that an ordinary shopper would probably never notice. And that is exactly what this channel is about. Not what the front of the package wants you to feel. What the rules, ingredients, and evidence actually say. So to understand whether zero really means zero, we first need to understand what allulose actually is. Allulose sounds like an artificial laboratory sweetener, but chemically, it is a monosaccharide, a simple sugar that occurs naturally in small amounts and can also be produced for use as a sweetener. It tastes sweet, but the body handles it differently from traditional sugars such as sucrose. That difference is the reason the FDA created a special enforcement policy for it. In 2020, the Food and Drug Administration issued final guidance, stating that it intended to exercise enforcement discretion so manufacturers could exclude allulose from the amount declared as total sugars and added sugars on nutrition facts labels. The FDA also said manufacturers could use a value of 0.4 calories per gram when calculating calories from allulose, instead of the roughly 4 calories per gram commonly associated with traditional sugars. But the guidance contains a detail that is easy to miss. FDA guidance is not the same thing as rewriting a federal regulation. The agency itself says guidance documents describe its current thinking and do not establish legally enforceable responsibilities unless specific laws or regulations are cited. That distinction became crucial in the Chobani case. The appeals court asked the FDA to explain its own regulation. The FDA told the court that the regulation defining total sugars includes all monosaccharides, including allulose. The court found that interpretation persuasive. In other words, the court said the existing regulation still defines allulose as a sugar. At the same time, the FDA's separate guidance says the agency currently does not intend to enforce the requirement to include allulose in the total sugars and added sugars numbers on the nutrition facts panel, while the issue remains under review for future rulemaking. Those two ideas sound contradictory, but they describe two different things. One is what the regulation says. The other is how the agency currently chooses to enforce part of the labeling system. And there is another layer. The federal rule for a sugar-free or zero sugar nutrient content claim points back to the regulatory definition of sugars. That is why the appeals court allowed the consumer's case to continue. The judges did not decide that Chobani ultimately violated the law. They decided that the case should not have been thrown out on the theory used by the lower court. The consumers will still have to prove their claims. Chobani can still raise defenses, and reasonable consumers' understanding of the label can still become a factual issue later in the case. This matters because allulose is not nutritionally identical to table sugar. Saying that allulose is a sugar under this regulation does not mean that 4 grams of allulose has the same caloric or metabolic effect as 4 grams of sucrose. The FDA's own guidance treats allulose differently, precisely because its caloric contribution and physiological effects differ from traditional sugars. So the viral question, how can this say zero sugar, has a real answer, because food labeling does not use only everyday language. It uses definitions, regulations, enforcement policies, serving sizes, and specific sections of the package that can be governed differently. The front says zero. The ingredient list says allulose. The nutrition facts panel may show 0 grams of total sugars. And the federal appeals court says allulose still falls inside the relevant regulatory definition of sugar. All of those statements can exist at the same time. That is not a simple gotcha. It is a labeling puzzle. And the next question is the one that matters most to shoppers. When a normal person sees zero sugar, what do they reasonably think they are buying? Imagine standing in the yogurt aisle for 10 seconds. You are not carrying the code of federal regulations. You are not reading FDA enforcement guidance. You are comparing packages. One says zero sugar. That phrase is absolute. It does not say lower sugar. It does not say different kind of sweetener. It says zero. That consumer expectation is one reason the appeals court refused to dismiss the deception claim. The court said the plaintiffs had plausibly alleged that consumers could be misled by an absolute sugar-free promise when the product contained 4 grams per serving of allulose. But plausibly alleged is not the same as proven. The case now continues, and the consumers will eventually need evidence showing that the labeling was actually false or likely to mislead reasonable consumers under the laws they are invoking. That legal nuance matters because there is also a legitimate nutritional distinction. Allulose is not simply ordinary table sugar wearing a different name. The FDA allows it to be treated differently on nutrition facts labels because its caloric contribution is much lower and its physiological effects differ from traditional sugars. So if someone sees this video and concludes, Chobani secretly put 4 grams of regular sugar in the yogurt, that would be inaccurate. The better conclusion is this: Chobani uses allulose, a monosaccharide sweetener. Current FDA enforcement policy allows allulose to be excluded from total sugars and added sugars on the nutrition facts panel. But the Seventh Circuit concluded that allulose still fits the regulatory definition of sugar relevant to the lawsuit, and that was enough to let the consumer's challenge to the zero sugar claim move forward. Now look at the product again. The front label gives you the promise. The ingredient list gives you the name. The nutrition facts panel gives you numbers created under labeling rules and enforcement policies. To understand the entire product, you sometimes need all three. That leads to a practical rule for anyone buying foods marketed as zero sugar or sugar-free. Do not stop at the headline on the front. Turn the package around. Read the ingredient list. Look for sweeteners such as allulose and other sugar substitutes. Check total carbohydrate, not only total sugars. Look at the serving size. And understand that zero on one line of a nutrition panel does not necessarily mean the food contains no sweet-tasting carbohydrate or sugar substitute of any kind. This case also reveals something larger about modern food marketing. Companies have only seconds to communicate with you. Words such as natural, clean, high protein, zero sugar, no added sugar, and organic simplify complicated products into quick promises. The promise may be permitted. It may even be technically accurate under the policy a company is following. But that does not always mean the average shopper understands it the same way. And that gap between the legal label and the consumer's mental picture is where some of the most interesting stories in the supermarket are hiding. So, what are you really buying when you pick up Chobani Zero Sugar? You are buying a yogurt that Chobani currently markets as having 0 grams of sugar, and that lists 4 grams of allulose on its product page. You are buying a product affected by an FDA policy that treats allulose differently from traditional sugar on the nutrition facts panel. And you are buying into a labeling claim that is now being challenged in federal court, with the final legal outcome still unresolved. Our verdict is not that Chobani has been proven deceptive. It has not. Our verdict is that the word zero is far more complicated than the front of the package makes it look. The label gives you the promise. The regulation gives you the definition. The ingredient list gives you the clue. And the court case shows what happens when those three do not fit neatly together. This is what you're really buying. If there is a product in your kitchen with a claim you have always trusted, tell us the exact brand and product in the comments. We may investigate it next.